Hey everyone, welcome back to part 3 of Project SuperFly 3.0. Let's start with the rear end. These are the transmission halves. In SuperFly 2.0, we did use the original Tamiya gearbox and cut them down, but now we're going to completely do away with that because this way I'm actually able to bring the rear suspension arms inboard, and you'll see why that's important later. Since we've got these gearboxes, the first thing that I would like to do is get a razor blade and just clear out the little opening here for the upper counter gear shaft. You just want to make sure that there's no residual support material in here. Same with where the bearings go. If these are not cleaned out, then the bearings won't sit properly, the gear case won't close properly, and it all just kind of balloons from there. So go ahead and do that to this case as well. Beginning with our very standard 5x8 bearings, we'll put one here on the outside. Again, don't forget to clean out that. So that'll just seat in there, and it would seat better if I didn't absolutely cover this in paint. Excuse me a minute. Well, I put too much paint in that. Probably have the same problem with this. Let's try to get this in here as well. Yeah, it's a little better. So there we go. And on the inside, we'll have another, there you go. See, without paint, it goes right in. Another 5x11 bearing. On this side, it's a little bit different. Here we're gonna have a 5x8. I was having a lot of issues with clearance, so that's why I went that route. It's just a little bit hard to start. There we go. The next bit is pretty much exactly as the standard Hornet. I thought you might like to see this. Here we have the prototype transmission housing that I 3D printed just to give us a test to see if everything lined up properly. And basically you can see here that I was just confirming that the gear mesh was correct. Just enough play in the counter gear. So I'll pull this apart and get my gears out of it. So we'll put this shaft in here, just like that. And again, it's dual supported now. Previously it would have been supported right here where this worn area is. We will install the diff gear. The counter gear shaft should, there it goes. That just about did it. There might be a little bit of break in, but I think we're all set there. Next, these halves theoretically should align. This will be the first time I'm doing it. Yeah, I think it's there. To hold this together, okay, here we go. So M3x12 screws, 1, 2, 3, I think 4. Just a heads up on this bottom one right here. There's actually a notch in the lower control arm mount to allow the screw head and the screwdriver to fit. That is how pressed for space I was. You see that? I'm not going to put the motor in yet. What I need to do is cut these axles, but I don't want any grinding bits going in here, and I don't want anything going in there, so I'll tape them off. I suppose I could have marked and pull them back out, but I'm actually quite curious where the drive cup is going to end up. Make sure it's correct with my actual calculations. So for my application, this is going to work. And if you ask me, I think it'd be best for yours as well, because it will help to reduce the amount of potential errors that you have. As long as the differential is working, you'll know that all your measurements are correct. To figure out how long the axle shafts have to be, you take your drive cup. Again, the part number for this is in the description. Slide it on over and you can see how far it goes down the drive shaft. Go ahead and get your silver paint pen, wedge it in there just like that, and then we can spin the axle, and theoretically take 2. I marked the shaft where I thought it had to be cut, and you can see it right there. So pulling that off and spin the axle around. I'll be using my, what is this, my metal cutting bit here. This isn't it. We also need to grind in a flat, because without that it'll be a lot harder for this to bind. So we'll do a little flat spot, but not going all the way to the edge, just a little bit in the center. Okay, put that on, bit of thread lock, you're good to go. And thread lock is on there. There we go. For the lower control arms, these are the same set used in SuperFly 2.0, exactly the same ones. For these, I did pull the sway bar links, and this will just go straight like that. Prior to any assembly, make sure that you clear out all these holes here, these 2 outer holes with a 3mm bit, the inner holes with a 2.5, 2.5. These can be left alone here. I put 2 washers, one there and one there, okay, just to act as bearings. And basically with these rear arms, they're designed so you can get one of these medium length screw pins and one of the short ones, and they end up meeting just about at the center like that. You can always use some of these longer ones and cut them down too. You can also buy an actual roll pin, or even just use a 3mm threaded rod, put a nut on each side, you're good to go. There's a lot of options here. Next, we will install the rear hubs. These are unique to SuperFly 3, and the reason they're unique is because they've been stretched. You can see here this opening is quite odd, and we'll get to that shortly. Way in there, you're going to drop a 5x11 bearing, same as out here, and you'll need one for each. Prior to installation, you want to clean these out with a 3mm bit. In fact, on this one here, you can see that it's pretty much clogged. If you can believe it, we need more screw pins. For these, they have to go on the inside because the shock absorber will go here and the upper link will get in the way. And of course, now that we have ball studs, we need more links. These links are about 39mm long from center to center. Before we install them, which I did earlier and then realized I had to install something else, let's put in the universal joints. These joints are for a TA02 or DF03RA. That is a series of letters and numbers. These are from Yao Racing. Interesting. These actually have no roll pins. How interesting. We'll drop this in from the stuff in there. Drop it in there. And this is the purpose for all this clearance. So the universal joint has to travel quite a long distance. Slot the universal joint in there. Pop that in. We'll put a roll pin in here and a hex drive output. A standard Tamiya roll pin, the same hex adapter you would use for a touring car. Let's go ahead and do the lower shock mount. That is going to be these little pieces here. You find these, well, basically they're on the Hornet. So take them off. If you have a donor Hornet, take it off the front. Otherwise, you'll find these on the Midnight Pumpkin and quite a few other Tamiyas. Worst case scenario, just get a piece of metal, bend it, a couple of holes, you're good to go. You'll see that little pin in the A-arm. Put the screw through that, align that pin with the little slot on the lower mount, and just thread it in, just like that. We will now install the motor using the stock hardware, or in my case, this nice clear one, which is left over from Project Crystal Hornet. We're going to go ahead and mount this. Our motor is installed, again, just like factory. And there's one last thing that we can do. Now, this is not a necessary part, but this is a skid plate, and I'm going to go ahead and install this. Fairly certain it takes a bunch of 12mm self-tapping M3s. Before I install the rear ones, we have a bumper. I felt that if the car is going to land directly on its backside, we might as well have a sacrificial piece. So there we go. You can see how the flexure is. Okay, it'll just kind of hopefully deflect a few times before it grenades violently, but I think it'll help. Some 12mm M3 self-tapping screws, and up here the 8mm long ones. Before we install these top 2 mounts, we're going to take a look at this area here because there's a shock tower that goes there and we need to install the transmission on the car first. I did want to point out as well, we've been talking about SuperFly 3, but just to be very clear, this entire transmission will fit a standard Tamiya Hornet. All you'll need is the rear wing mount, and that is it. The cage would be useful, but it is not necessary. You just take off the back of your Hornet, and now you've got rear independent suspension. It even lines up to all the factory mounting points. So 0 modification to the chassis or anything. This will mount. This is going to be pretty straightforward to install. Yeah, a bit anticlimactic, I know. Do make sure you clean these out with a 2.5mm drill bit, and then you'll want to do the same with these 2 back here. Under here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 12mm long self-tappers. Next, we need to put the shock tower on, which is, I guess, kind of a weird thing to call this, but it is the shock tower. That'll slot in right there. It'll pick up the original shock mounts from the M-Pro rear wing mount, and then this will just kind of slot itself right in there. You see it'll do its best to get around those screw heads. There's also 1 screw smack dab in the middle. This one can be a fairly short, like a 4mm long screw. You can see there's really no screw there. Perhaps I have to put a hole in that at some later date. All the rest, these two outer ones and these two central ones, and these two here are 12mm long. These are 85mm shocks. The fronts, I believe, were 75. Let's just confirm that. Basically 80mm long shocks. That's about how close you're going to get with accuracy on these things. The fronts were 70s. And as before, I'm going to install the Ampro lower mounts. And then for my application, I'm going to use an M2.5 screw at the top. You're welcome to use something else, but you've just got to make sure that you've got the adequate clearance. This is a 15mm long M3 screw. 12mm is probably fine. It has to be installed in this orientation, otherwise the nut can very likely hit the axle. And as before, for my application, I used that same brass sleeve. Just like with the front, I used 2.5, an M2.5 at the top, and there we go. You know what I did not think about? Oh, it's okay here, okay. One thing to note, and I completely forgot about it here, is that you do not want these arms to extend too far. In this case here, they are designed for 80mm of travel. To me, they're a little bit beyond that, but close enough. If you go too far, then it is possible that the axle here will fall into the drive cup when it's at its lowest position and actually get caught. And what ends up happening is you get this weird clicking sound. Anybody with a re-release, Tamiya Blackfoot or Monster Beetle, is familiar with that sound. We're not quite done yet. We do have to install the front tires, and I'm already looking like, wow, look at that. There's quite a lot of negative camber in the front. Why did I not notice that yesterday? Who knows? Perhaps I was too anxious. At the rear, here is something I'm very, very proud of, and something that I was upset about on SuperFly 2. We cannot use these stock rims, which is unfortunate. However, I've taken care of that. Looks like the stock rim, but it isn't. We're gonna go ahead and paint these at some point, and then install some tires and put them on the back. I'd like to install the velocity stacks on the car, and what we can see here is a prototype. It's a quick FDM print to make sure that the stacks were put in the right location. And this here was a dashboard, but it was in the wrong spot. So this has served its purpose, and now we'll replace that with this. What we're looking at here are 3 polyjet printed stacks, and these came in a translucent clear color. This main body is a SLS printed part, and it has a little steering wheel right there that I'll do some more detailing on. Also has a little dash, because why the heck not? This dash was modeled to copy the dash in my 1978 Fiat 124 Spider, because why not? So I will add a little bit of coloring over here and then glue this using these 2 little studs on the back of this housing. This is all held in with a single screw right there, and then it is braced on either side of the roll cage with these little clips here. Added a bit of detail. This is just an embossed part. Again, this is a polyjet printed piece that I sprayed in black and then just used a silver paint pen to go over it. And before I install it, I've got a lot of layers of paint on this, so I do want to clean these holes out just a bit. And this is a pretty common procedure on really any SLS printed part. And now in theory, this should, yeah, it does. Okay, cool. It just drops right in there. A couple little dabs of glue and we will be all set. There's a tiny little A that is on the sprue for the dash, and that just drops straight into the steering wheel. It's just one 3mm self-tapping screw. That one's about 8mm long. Clips in right there. Got your little instrument cluster right there. Painted the A in magenta, orange, and yellow. And I figured I painted these braces in black so they don't stand out as much. They are kind of in the way, but they are critical as they are a main structural point for the cage to the chassis.